You could feel the heat rising off the asphalt in Birmingham, Alabama, the kind that blurs the horizon and warps the truth. It was May 18, 1996, a day that began like 1,000 others, and ended soaked in silence and blood. A routine pit stop turned into a graveyard discovery. A lone traveler at a sleepy gas station on the city's edge pushed open the door and stumbled into a nightmare. There, crumpled near the exit like a discarded jacket, lay the attendant, lifeless, unmoving. A man whose final breath had slipped out between gasoline fumes and summer dust. The first officers on scene took one look and knew this wasn't just a robbery gone awry. Something was off. The register sat untouched, its drawer shut tight. A stack of bills lounged on the counter like they'd been waiting for a hand that never came. No sign of struggle. No clear motive. Just a crimson trail, smeared across tile and concrete, whispering a story of desperation. The clerk, wounded but clinging to hope, had dragged himself outside and died chasing salvation. The Birmingham police kicked into gear. But behind their efforts, in the shadows, the bureau stirred. The FBI doesn't show up for just any street-side homicide. No, they come in when the wind smells like something deeper, calculated, cross-jurisdictional, and cold. Their first asset? The eye that never sleeps, surveillance. But the station's only camera had seen better days. The tape was grainy, overused, the kind of footage that looked like it had been recorded through fog and time. Still, the Bureau's forensic techs took it, dissected it frame by frame, squeezing every pixel for truth. What emerged was chilling. A single man entered. No raised voices. No signs of resistance. The clerk didn't defy, he complied. But that didn't matter. The shooter raised his weapon and fired anyway. No hesitation. No warning. Just the mechanical finality of someone who had done this before or wanted to feel what it was like. FBI analysts froze the image. Cleaned it. Ran it through facial recognition. Nothing. No matches. No name. Just a phantom with a firearm and a blurred face. So the Bureau pivoted. They leaned into the human element, canvassing, probing the victim's circle. Friends, family, co-workers. Had anyone seen a threat lurking in the shadows? Silence. The case, for a time, sat in limbo like a vinyl on pause, waiting for the needle to drop. But the FBI wasn't done. They don't sleep. They don't forget. They knew violence like this doesn't strike once. It spreads. And 2 months later, it did. Just 20 miles south, in Shelby County, a call came in. A pawn shop had gone quiet. Too quiet. And what the authorities found inside would open the door to something far darker. But that's another scene in this story, one painted in cold blood and echoing gunfire. Summer rolled on, sticky and still, but peace was a brittle illusion. In Shelby County, not far from Birmingham's city line, that illusion shattered with the crack of gunfire no one heard, at least, not in time. It was an unassuming little pawn shop. The kind of place where life's mistakes and desperation were bartered for $20 bills and a promise to return. But on that day, it became a tomb. 2 strangers walked in just past 3 in the afternoon. Young. Calm. Focused. They moved with the kind of cool confidence you don't teach, you inherit, or earn the hard way. One carried a bag. The other carried something colder. By the time deputies arrived, the floor was stained with truth no mop could scrub clean. The shop's owner was gone, executed behind his own counter. His assistant, barely clinging to life, was rushed away under a chorus of sirens. Her fate hung by a thread. The killers hadn't just taken cash. No, they took something far more dangerous, firepower. 32 guns vanished into thin air, a full arsenal, stolen from behind that glass counter. Pistols, shotguns, rifles. Tools of violence, now in the hands of men who had already proved they knew how to use them. The scene was chaos in quiet. Shell casings littered the floor like breadcrumbs for the devils who'd walked in. Fingerprints were useless, too many customers had touched the merchandise. The murder weapon? A 9mm, the same caliber used in the gas station killing. The pattern was starting to whisper through the smoke. And then, as detectives combed the aftermath, a question arose. A curious pile of metal shavings sat near a key-cutting machine. Not part of any robbery, at least not one driven by cash. Had the killers made a key? If so, to what? But answers would have to wait. They needed eyes evidence. And that meant surveillance. At first glance, the security system was a dead end. The tape was gone. Stolen. The killers had learned their lesson. Or so they thought. One detective, sharp as razors, remembered something the owner had once said: "This one's for show. The real camera's hidden." And just like that, the game changed. Behind a wall, buried in wires and dust, the real camera blinked its quiet testimony. Still rolling. Still watching. The killers had taken the decoy and left behind the truth. What that footage revealed chilled even the Bureau's seasoned agents. At 3:23 p.m., the two suspects entered. They moved like predators who'd cased the terrain. Without panic, they corralled the victims behind the counter. The victims didn't resist, they believed cooperation would save them. But mercy wasn't on the menu. For 13 slow, methodical minutes, the duo ransacked the store. Jewelry. Cash. Firearms. Every item fed into that bag, or, in this case, a guitar case. A peculiar choice. One that would come to matter. And then, without warning, they opened fire. Not for defense. Not out of fear. But with precision. Cold, deliberate, mechanical. Even when one of the guns jammed, the shooter didn't flinch. He cleared the chamber, reloaded, and continued like he was practicing a routine. The final shot wasn't a kill. It was a statement. Outside the shop, the camera caught a glimpse of their exit, a red pickup truck. Both assailants entered through the passenger side. Which meant there was someone else. A third figure. A driver. An accomplice waiting in the wings. Now, this wasn't just a robbery. It was a warpath. And the FBI knew they weren't hunting men anymore. They were pursuing a crew organized, mobile, and deadly. The hunt had truly begun. The red pickup was more than just a vehicle, it was a symbol. A streak of crimson tearing through the backroads of Alabama, carrying with it not just fugitives, but ghosts. 3 of them, by now. 2 behind the trigger, 1 behind the wheel. Back inside the pawn shop, the FBI's forensics team, surgical in their precision, swept every inch. They weren't just looking for answers, they were chasing the scent of intent. That's when they noticed the guitar case. Tossed carelessly onto the floor, the velvet-lined interior gaped open and empty, the same case caught on film moments after the massacre. The implication was grim. Whatever had been inside it, those 32 stolen guns, had already vanished, scattered like seeds into the underworld. But there was something else. Amid the discarded receipts and dusty floor tiles, an agent noticed a scrap of paper. A bus ticket stub headed north. Boston, Massachusetts. And it bore a name. Stephen McKinney. He wasn't unknown. The Bureau had heard the name before, not a triggerman, perhaps, but a player nonetheless. 19 years old. A known associate of the streets. And most importantly, the man who owned a red truck. Suddenly, that third seat in the pickup had a name. SWAT raided McKinney's residence the same night. Tactical boots echoed down the hallway, shouted commands split the stillness, but the house was cold. Empty. Like someone had been tipped off, or just moved faster than expected. Yet even in absence, the walls spoke. Inside, the FBI discovered a tape, the very one the killers had stolen, believing it to be the only recording. It was the decoy. They destroyed the wrong evidence. And beside it, another piece of the puzzle, a guitar case. The same kind. The same look. This wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. The killers had passed through. They had regrouped.
They had moved on. But not without leaving more behind.
In a drawer, half buried under fast food receipts and change, agents found jewelry pieces that matched the pawn shop's missing inventory.
A diamond-studded crucifix. A watch engraved with a dead man's name. These weren't just souvenirs. They were evidence. Artifacts of arrogance.
And perhaps, a whisper of overconfidence. McKinney might have been the driver, but now it was clear he was deeper in this than anyone had imagined.
No longer just a wheelman. He was a conspirator. A thread tying the entire tapestry together. The FBI widened their search. McKinney's phone records became a map.
Dozens of calls traced a thin red line from Birmingham to Boston to a small apartment in Roxbury, a working-class pocket of the city where questions usually meet silence. And so, the Bureau moved north.
On July 28, 1996, federal agents surrounded the building in Roxbury with the quiet discipline of men who'd done this before. They didn't knock. They waited. Watched. Patience was their weapon. And then he stepped out. Stephen McKinney. Calm. Unarmed.
Not a twitch of defiance on his face.
Just a kid who thought maybe, just maybe, he'd stayed ahead of the storm. He hadn't.
They followed him, shadow to shadow, until he led them to a second location.
A new address. A new hideout.
There, with precision and zero hesitation, the agents moved in.
Federal Bureau of Investigation. Don't move. McKinney froze.
And just like that, the first piece of the trio fell. But the ones holding the guns, Marcus Presley and Samuel Gamble, were still out there.
And the Bureau knew they were running out of time.
McKinney was in custody, quiet, unreadable, like a poker player staring down the barrel of a losing hand.
But silence is its own confession.
The Bureau didn't need his voice, they had the walls, the wires, and the trail he'd left behind. Inside his Boston hideaway, agents uncovered more than just a fugitive's poor attempt at vanishing. They found what the pawn shop inventory said was gone: 3 firearms, each traceable, each logged in the ledger of a dead man's store.
No doubt remained. McKinney wasn't just a driver. He was in the engine room of this operation. But Presley and Gamble, they were still ghosts, armed and wandering. The FBI turned to McKinney's call logs once again. Every number. Every minute. Patterns began to surface like bruises beneath the skin. One contact stood out: a woman in Norfolk, Virginia. Local law enforcement might have ignored it. But the Bureau? They saw the heartbeat in the data.
Further interviews cracked the final layer. Family and acquaintances, pressed under the weight of federal pressure, whispered what they'd long feared to admit. Samuel Gamble had a girlfriend in Norfolk. Suddenly, Virginia wasn't just a dot on the map, it was ground zero. By August 8, the Bureau had their plan in motion.
No sirens. No headlines.
Just a quiet stakeout outside an aging apartment complex tucked into Norfolk's urban sprawl. The kind of place where curtains twitch at the sight of a black sedan. The agents didn't need noise, they needed patience.
And results. And they got both. Hours passed until a man emerged. He walked like he didn't know the world was watching.
One of the agents recognized him almost immediately: Gamble's uncle.
He wasn't just passing through. He was tied to this. And when the agents moved in and checked his coat, their suspicions hardened into certainty. Inside his jacket was a stolen firearm. One of the 32. The time for waiting was over. Just before dawn, with fog curling through the alleyways and tension hanging like a blade, the FBI launched their operation. Tactical teams encircled the building, each step a silent chord in a symphony of precision. Federal agents. Final warning. No answer. Just a rustle. A floorboard's creak. And then, movement.
The breach team poured in, room by room, breath tight, weapons raised. In a back room, beneath a blanket of adrenaline and sleep, they found him: Marcus Presley.
The boy killer. The one whose calm squeeze of a trigger had taken 2 lives. Hands up. Now. He didn't run. He didn't reach.
He just blinked, groggy and finished.
The lion had become a lamb.
A few doors down, they found the second shadow, Samuel Gamble.
Wide-eyed. Cornered. Just as armed. Just as quiet.
Both were taken without a shot fired.
And just like that, the manhunt was over. They had them. All three. Caught in the Bureau's web of patience and precision. But the investigation wasn't done.
Now came the reckoning, and the Bureau was ready to make their case. Back at the Bureau's regional field office, the walls were thick with evidence, boxes of files, surveillance stills, and the kind of photographs that don't need captions. The FBI had the suspects, but they weren't chasing confessions. They didn't need them. They had the tape. In a soundproof interview room, Marcus Presley and Samuel Gamble sat across from federal agents, no shackles of iron, just the invisible weight of what was coming.
At first, they played their roles. Denial. Confusion. The well-worn routine of the cornered and the desperate. But then came the playback. The pawnshop footage, enhanced, clarified, unforgiving. Frame by frame, it told the story they couldn't escape. Presley, stepping forward, calm and detached, raising the weapon. Gamble, flanking him, silent and complicit.
The victims, compliant, pleading with their eyes.
And then, thunder. When the killers saw it, something shifted. Gamble looked away. Presley, the younger of the two, didn't flinch. But his silence wasn't strength, it was resignation. He broke first.
Slowly, and without ceremony, he confessed to both murders, the gas station and the pawnshop.
His voice didn't rise, didn't crack. Just the steady cadence of a man walking through the final chapter of his own story. Gamble followed with his own account, laced with deflection and denial. He tried to cast his shadow elsewhere, onto Presley, onto fate. But the footage was the final judge. The tape didn't lie, and the jury never blinked. Meanwhile, Stephen McKinney held firm. No confessions. No emotions. He played the quiet card, hoping the law might see him as the lesser piece of the machine. But the evidence said otherwise. The FBI had more than statements. They had timestamps. Phone logs. Stolen goods. Firearms traced back to scenes he claimed he hadn't entered. The Bureau's case wasn't just solid, it was airtight. And while agents finished building the final bricks of prosecution, the media caught scent of the storm. Headlines lit up across Alabama, FBI captures pawnshop killers. But behind the scenes, it wasn't about praise. For the Bureau, it was about closure. For families shattered by sudden loss. For the city that watched its safety unravel under fluorescent lights and surveillance tape. And for the agents, it was a grim reminder, real monsters don't always hide in alleys. Sometimes they walk through the front door in broad daylight. Still, justice hadn't yet had its final word. That would come next, in courtrooms echoing with silence, in juries leaning forward to hear one final story told by grainy footage and expert testimony. The courtroom lights were clinical. Harsh. They exposed everything, the truth, the lies, and the men who thought they could outrun both. On trial were not just three young men, but the choices that turned them into headlines. The footage was played again, this time for 12 strangers bound by civic duty and the weight of human loss. No narration. No music. Just the cold, flickering testimony of a camera that had never looked away. Marcus Presley sat still as his own actions replayed in high definition. Every move, the way he raised the weapon, the unflinching execution, the moment his gun jammed and he reloaded like a man brushing dust from his sleeve. The jury watched it all, and when they looked back at Presley, there was no question in their eyes. He was sentenced to die twice. Once for the gas station killing. Once for the pawn shop executions. The youngest of the three, just 16 when the blood was spilled, now marked by the law for death. Samuel Gamble, 18 at the time of the crimes, tried to pivot. He pointed fingers. Told stories. But the film told the truth, and the truth doesn't barter.
The jury saw him for what he was, not a bystander, but a partner in slaughter. He too was sentenced to death. And Stephen McKinney, the man in the driver's seat. He never pulled a trigger, but he set the route. He planned. He harbored. He ran. The court called it felony murder and conspiracy. 50 years behind bars. A lifetime in steel and regret. The verdicts were clean, the judgments swift. But closure? That's a slower thing. In the back of the courtroom, family members clutched photographs instead of loved ones. They had justice, yes, but justice is a cold comfort when set against the warmth of a voice you'll never hear again. The FBI's role wasn't just pivotal, it was transformative. They cracked the case when it stalled. They followed footprints no one else could see. Surveillance, forensics, behavioral profiling all spun into a net tight enough to catch shadows. And they did it without chaos. Without noise. Just patience, clarity, and conviction. When the final gavel fell, and the courtroom emptied, one agent stayed behind for a moment longer. He looked at the still image frozen on the screen, Presley with his arm raised, mid-motion, caught forever. That camera, he murmured, did more than record a crime. It solved it. And maybe, in some quiet, ironic way, the pawnshop owner, long gone, had helped close his own case. By planting the decoy camera, by hiding the real one, he'd left behind the most damning witness of all. A final clue. A final act of defiance. And for the Bureau, one more case closed in a world where truth often hides in shadow.